The $2.8 trillion global car market, once a symbol of industrial might and consumer prosperity, is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. For Wolff, this isn't merely an industry downturn. It's an indictment of a capitalist system that has turned transportation into a financial instrument and necessity into speculation. He traces the crisis back through decades of debt-driven expansion, corporate greed, and government complicity.
The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. But your voice is rising. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of it. Why'd have you checkmark subscribe to this channel for more fearless analysis from Richard Wolff and voices the mainstream media refuses to platform?
A structure where the appearance of growth masks an economic illusion built on credit, exploitation, and environmental neglect. As consumers default on loans and automakers scramble for bailouts, Wolff argues that the collapse reveals something deeper. A moral and systemic failure, where pursuit of profit has eclipsed the purpose of production itself. What's falling apart, he warns, isn't just the car industry. It's the very logic of an economy that prioritizes accumulation over survival. Wolff exposes this event as more than a market correction. It's a symptom of capitalism's recurring disease. Debt, speculation, and inequality are not accidents. They're the engine of a system designed to enrich the few and burden the many. From inflated car loans to taxpayer-funded bailouts, the cycle repeats. Corporate power is preserved, while workers and communities pay the price. Wolff calls for a radical rethinking of our economic structure, one that redirects production toward human needs, sustainability, and democratic control. The car market's collapse, in his view, should not be seen as a tragedy to repair, but as a revelation to act upon. A rare moment to confront the moral and structural bankruptcy of the system and imagine an economy built for people, not profit. The collapse of the $2.8 trillion global car market isn't just an economic event. It's a seismic indictment of the system that created it. This is a raw fallout of decades of reckless capitalism, and Professor Richard D. Wolff isn't holding back. In a scathing lecture, he rips away the illusion that this is some unexpected industry failure. No, this is exactly what happens when capitalism prioritizes profit over people, speculation over sustainability, and corporate greed over common good. The car market didn't collapse because people suddenly stopped driving. It collapsed because the entire industry was a house of cards, built on unsustainable debt, toxic financial instruments, and a systemic rot that's been festering for years. The financialization of the auto sector transformed cars into profit-maximizing machines, not for people driving them, but for the banks, the CEOs, and the corporate shareholders who milked every dollar out of the system before letting it fall apart. Car loans, leases, and massive amounts of corporate debt were securitized, packaged, and sold off like the subprime mortgages before the 2008 crash. All of it was designed to keep the engine of false growth humming, even as real wages stagnated and working people sank deeper into debt. Consumers weren't buying cars because they could afford them. They were forced to borrow to maintain even a semblance of normalcy, all while the industry kept raising prices and pushing newer models through planned obsolescence, creating artificial demand in a world already oversaturated. And when it all started to unravel, when default began to spike and the auto bubble popped, who paid the price? Not the auto executives, not the investors. No, it was the workers, the communities, the people. Government bailouts rushed in to protect corporate wealth, just like they always do. Profits were privatized while losses were dumped on the public. It's the same old scam. Crisis hits, billionaires cash out, and everyday people are left to pick up the pieces. Wolff lays it out clearly. This isn't mismanagement. This is the system working exactly as designed. Capitalism is built to boom and bust, with profits made on the way up and bailouts on the way down. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's a business model, one that treats human lives as collateral damage in the pursuit of shareholder returns. The so-called prosperity of the auto industry was a lie. It was debt-disguised growth. Behind every shiny showroom and TV ad was a mountain of unpaid loans, overextended credit, and financial engineering so complex it masked just how fragile the system really was. And now the mask is off. Consumers were pushed into endless borrowing cycles. Want a car? Finance it. Can't afford a loan? Lease it. Still can't pay? Roll it into a new loan. The industry didn't care if people could actually afford their cars. All it cared about was the illusion of movement. More sales, more numbers, more bonuses. Meanwhile, wages flatlined, job security vanished, and the cost of living skyrocketed. Families didn't buy new vehicles because they wanted to. They did it because they had no choice, and were told it was normal. And this crisis isn't just financial. It's moral. It's environmental. It's social. Cities were designed around car ownership, forcing people into a lifestyle that made them dependent on an industry engineered to exploit them. Public transit was defunded. Walkable communities were sacrificed. Pollution soared. And all of it was sold under the banner of progress. This model of consumption wasn't just unsustainable. It was deliberately destructive. Corporations lobbied for infrastructure that kept them in power. They manufactured scarcity. They pushed models designed to break down, so consumers would have to replace them. They created an entire culture around ownership, while actively sabotaging alternatives that might have served public needs. And when the collapse hit, the pain was not evenly distributed. While executives patted golden parachutes and investors pivoted to new markets, auto workers lost jobs. Small towns built around manufacturing plants were gutted. Support industries, dealerships, repair shops, parts manufacturers were thrown into disarray. And in every case, the people paying the price were the ones who had the least to begin with. Wolff drives the point home. This is capitalism at work. The system is structured to funnel wealth upward. When profits are rolling in, the elites celebrate free markets. But when the market turns against them, they cry out for government rescue and get it. The working class, meanwhile, is told to tighten their belts and be patient. Austerity for the many, security for the few. There is no accountability in this model. There are no lessons learned. Just like after the housing crash, nothing structural will be fixed unless there is mass public pressure. The people who created this disaster are already plotting their next move. They'll shift the narrative. Blame the workers. Blame the regulators. Blame anyone but themselves. And unless the system changes, the cycle will continue. Wolff doesn't just diagnose the disease. He prescribes a cure. We need to fundamentally rethink our economy. Production must serve people, not profits. Factories should be retooled to build sustainable public transportation, not overpriced SUVs no one can afford. Wealth must be democratized. Ownership should belong to workers and communities, not distant shareholders. Decision-making must be reclaimed from boardrooms and brought to the people actually affected by those decisions. This moment is not just a crisis. It's an opportunity to tear down the myth that capitalism is the best we can do, an opportunity to expose the rot at the heart of our economic system and demand something better, not reforms, not Band-Aids, a real transformation. Environmental degradation, income inequality, job insecurity, these aren't side effects. They're the intended outcomes of a system obsessed with growth at all costs. And now, the costs are crashing down around us. The auto market collapse is just the latest warning shot. Healthcare, housing, education, they're all built on the same unstable foundation, all of them vulnerable to the same boom and bust disasters. The lesson is clear. As long as profit is a priority, people will suffer. As long as markets dictate our lives, we are nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the knowledge. We have the resources. What we need is the will to build something new. We need an economy that values human needs over corporate greed. One that invests in public infrastructure, not just private wealth. One that treats housing, healthcare, and transportation as rights, not commodities. One that sees workers not as liabilities, but as a very foundation prosperity. This isn't about ideology. It's about survival. The climate crisis demands sustainable alternatives. The debt crisis demands financial justice. The social crisis demands dignity and opportunity for all. And that means breaking free from an economic model that has proven time and again that it cannot deliver. Professor Wolff's warning is stark, but it's also a call to action. The collapse of the global car market is not the end. It's the beginning of a reckoning. We can no longer pretend the system is working. It's not. It hasn't been for a long time. And if we don't change course now, the next collapse won't just be in cars. It'll be in the very fabric of our society. It's time to stop asking how we can save capitalism and start asking how we can replace it, because this system is broken beyond repair. The car market crash isn't a fluke. It's the future, unless we make a different choice. If this breakdown has you fired up, don't sit on the sidelines. Subscribe, share, and speak out. This isn't just about cars. It's about all of us. Let's build an economy that works for people, not profits. The collapse is real, but so is the opportunity to change everything. Let's be clear, this isn't just about metal wheels and assembly lines. The collapse of the global car market, valued at $2.8 trillion, is the latest, clearest example of capitalism reaching its expiration date. What Professor Richard D. Wolff explains with brutal clarity is that this disaster is no accident. It's a feature, not a bug. A systemic failure born out of decades of policies that sold out working people in favor of executive bonuses, investor returns, and market manipulation. Cars became financial products, not transportation tools. Your vehicle stopped being a way to get to work or take your kids to school. It became a profit center for lenders, a target for debt schemes, and a disposable asset in a speculative market run amok. And it was all orchestrated. Auto loans were packaged, sliced, sold, and securitized just like the mortgages that detonated the 2008 financial collapse. These weren't solutions to consumer needs. They were time bombs designed to enrich the few while loading risk onto the many. Debt fuel consumption became the only way to sustain growth in a system where real wages were going nowhere. And this wasn't just tolerated. It was actively encouraged. Politicians, corporations, banks, they all fed the lie that everything was fine, that buying a $40,000 car with a 7-year loan was normal, that relying on debt for essentials wasn't a symptom of decay, but a sign of prosperity. It was propaganda, plain and simple. But the house of cards couldn't stand forever. Interest rates climbed, loan defaults surged, and suddenly the entire illusion came crashing down. And where was the safety net? For corporations? Immediate. Government money flowed like champagne. Fast, abundant, no strings attached. For workers? Silence. Layoffs, plant closures, supply chain collapses. As always, capitalism insulates the elite while throwing working people under the bus. This is how crises are designed in this system. When profits flow, the wealthy hoard them. When losses hit, the public is forced to absorb them. This isn't just bad economics. It's theft in broad daylight, and it happens every single time. Let's talk about that government response, because it matters. What Wolff points out is that these bailouts don't just fix nothing. They actively entrench the very behaviors that caused the crisis in the first place. They reward recklessness. They preserve broken business models. And they reinforce a two-tier economy, one where the rich are rescued and the rest are told to sacrifice. And while the auto giant are kept afloat by your tax dollars, what happens to the infrastructure you use every day? Public transit is neglected. Sustainable transport is sidelined. Urban planning still revolves around car ownership. Even though that model has failed spectacularly, the opportunity to reimagine mobility, to create systems based on sustainability, equity, and accessibility, is squandered in favor of propping up a corpse. The environmental costs of this collapse are staggering. Let's not pretend this is just about money. The obsession with endless car production and mass consumption has poisoned the air, devoured our landscapes, and locked us into a cycle of destruction. Cities were designed to serve vehicles, not people. Sprawling suburbs, highways that cut through communities, parking lots instead of parks. It wasn't progress. It was profit masquerading as modernity. And now that it's collapsed, the environmental debt is coming due alongside the financial one. The carbon footprint of the auto industry isn't just unsustainable, it's catastrophic. And yet, the so-called solutions still center around reviving the car market instead of transforming it. What Wolff makes painfully clear is that the system never had a future. It only had a timeline. And now we're watching the expiration date get stamped in real time. Even more disturbing is the social fallout. The human cost that rarely makes the headlines. Communities that depended on manufacturing jobs are hollowed out. Support industries, mechanics, part suppliers, transport workers face economic ruin. Families lose stability. Mental health deteriorates. Local economies collapse. And through it all, corporate executives issue press releases filled with platitudes about transformation and resilience. But there's no transformation, no resilience, just more consolidation, more automation, and more cuts. They're not saving jobs, they're salvaging shareholder confidence. This crisis also exposes the ugly truth about inequality. Because while working class people are buried in car payments they can't afford, elites are buying luxury EVs, investing in autonomous vehicle startups, and flying to climate conferences in private jets. It's not just hypocrisy. It's a system designed to make sure the rich never lose. Capitalism always finds a way to climb out of the crater it creates, on the backs of the people it crushed. But Wolff's lecture doesn't just expose the damage. It demands we confront the ideology behind it. The belief that markets are infallible, that growth is always good, that private ownership of production is the only path forward. That belief system has failed, and it's failed over and over again. The auto market collapse is not a one-off event. It's the same pattern we've seen in housing, healthcare, education, and energy. Artificial demand, exploitative lending, corporate control, political complicity. Crash, bailout, repeat. If this is capitalism's best, we need to stop pretending it's the only option. Professor Wolff calls for more than just regulation or oversight. He calls for a total rethinking of how we structure economic life. Instead of producing for profit, produce for people. Instead of monopolies, worker-owned cooperatives. Instead of planned obsolescence, sustainable design. Instead of corporate bailouts, public investment in what actually matters. Factories should be building electric buses, not luxury SUVs. Infrastructure should prioritize public transit, not more highways. Communities should own their local industries, not foreign shareholders or private equity vultures. And the wealth that's been hoarded at the top, it's time to redistribute it, not through charity, but through justice. This isn't a pipe dream. It's the only path forward that doesn't end in more collapse, more suffering, and more ecological devastation. And yes, it's political, because the current political class has chosen, time and time again, to protect the status quo, to serve the donor class, to maintain the illusion of stability, while the foundations rot beneath us. But there's another way, a democratic economy, one where decisions about production and investment are made collectively, not by boardrooms chasing quarterly profits, one where the public good takes precedence over private gain. And the time to fight for it is now, because what this collapse reveals, brutally, unmistakably, is that capitalism doesn't just fail people. It punishes them. It sets them up for failure, blames them when it happens, and then sells them a solution to the next crisis it's already creating. Enough. We need a system that doesn't treat basic transportation like a luxury, that doesn't trap families in cycles of debt just to get to work, that doesn't poison the air, bankrupt cities, and then demand gratitude when it gives crumbs back. We need an economy built on solidarity, sustainability, and self-determination, not on the broken promise of trickle-down prosperity. This is not the time to tinker around the edges. It's time to take the wheel away from the profiteers who drove us into this ditch in the first place. The collapse of the $2.8 trillion car market is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one, if we're brave enough to write it. We've reached the breaking point, not just in the auto industry, but in the very way we think about value, labor, and survival. The $2.8 trillion collapse isn't some temporary setback that a few stimulus checks or interest rate tweaks will fix. It's the sound of capitalism cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. And yet, what's the media narrative? Market correction, consumer confidence, temporary supply chain issues. It's a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to distract from the truth. The people running the system knew it was unsustainable, and they kept the machine running anyway. Because as long as the profits kept rolling in, the collapse could always be someone else's problem. And now, it's our problem. They'll tell you to keep calm, that the market will recover. But recover for who? The automakers will survive. The shareholders will be fine. The bankers are already betting on the next speculative wave. But the working families drowning in debt, the towns devastated by layoffs, The transit deserts where people can't afford to live, let alone drive, they're not going to recover. They were never part of the plan to begin with. And that's the heart of Wolff's argument. This system was never built to serve you. It was built to exploit you, squeeze you, and discard you when your labor is no longer profitable. Cars were just a product this time. In the past, it was homes. Before that, healthcare. Next, it'll be education, food, water. Whatever they can monetize, they will, until it all falls apart again. So no, this collapse isn't about supply chains or inflation. It's about the inevitability of breakdown in a system that worships profit and ignores reality. It's about decades of decisions made by people who never had to worry about a car payment, never miss a shift, never had to choose between a repair and a grocery bill. It's about a rigged game, and the rest of us being told to play along until the next explosion. But we're done playing. This is the moment to pull back the curtain and see the machine for what it really is. To reject the false comfort of normalcy and start demanding something radically different. Wolff is right. We don't need to revive the system. We need to replace it. A system that builds for the public good, not private gain. That invests in clean energy, public transport, cooperative business models, and sustainable living. Not debt traps disguised as opportunity. If we don't act now, we're not just facing another economic crisis. We're signing up for permanent instability, permanent inequality, permanent environmental destruction. So here's the call. Don't just share this message. Use it. Challenge your leaders. Organize in your community. Speak up at work. Push for policies that put people before profits. Because they're not going to save us. We have to save each other.